You have to remember that open source is extremely expensive, extremely hard to do. We really try to do our best. We work with other vendors in making all these projects better. But I do get a lot of delight from knowing that one day some competitor of Vercel will take all of this, and that's great. It's so much better for humanity and so much better for civilization than if they had to start from scratch again and again and again and again.
Today on the Eric Ries Show, I'm joined by Guillermo Rauch, CEO and founder of Vercel, the company powering some of the biggest names on the internet, from OpenAI to Nintendo. Under his leadership, Vercel has grown to over $200 million in annual revenue and become a cornerstone of modern web infrastructure. They've got their fingerprints all over the AI revolution. In this conversation, Guillermo shares how growing up in Argentina with limited access to technology led him to discover the world-changing power of open source, how that obsession helped him break into Silicon Valley, and why building in public has been Vercel's ultimate growth engine. We also dive into his vision for the AI cloud, the future of software powered by agents and even vibe coding, plus his philosophy of recursive founder mode, empowering every team member to think and act like a founder. If you've ever wondered how open source, cloud, and AI converge to create generational companies, this episode is for you. Here's my conversation with Guillermo Rauch. All right, Guillermo, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation.
I'm so glad to be here.
Okay, I want to jump right in because one of the things I've been obsessed with lately is the way that people are taught to build companies leaves them blind to all kinds of externalities. So, obviously we've heard about plenty of examples of companies that do pollution or they do something bad for their customers and they don't have to pay the consequences of that. And so a lot of company building is focused on that. But the thing I've been obsessed with lately is it also leaves us blind to positive externalities. That is things that we do that don't have any apparent, immediate profit-making purpose for the company, and yet enable a huge company to be built on the trust that creates. And of course, open source to me is the number one thing that people are blind to. They don't see how powerful it can be. I feel like you have been obsessed with open source for a lot of years. And I wonder, since you didn't come to this from a traditional business building background, I wonder if you feel like that is part of why you were able to see this possibility. And maybe just give us a sense of how did you first discover open source? How did you figure out that was going to be, such a big part of the future of technology?
Yeah, I'm glad you're pointing this out because it's something I think about a lot. Open source is this really powerful, and I still feel kind of underrated.
Underrated, absolutely.
Side effect almost of capitalism, like the way that companies are cooperating at scale. So I'll give you a bit about my story. When I was trying to learn how to program, I had a hard time getting started with tools that were considered to be advanced, but the barrier to entry was really, really, really high. The compilers, the tools, the IDEs, everything was proprietary.
Yeah.
And I was growing up in Argentina in a very humble, household in a very humble neighborhood in the outskirts of Buenos Aires. And obviously, we had just barely been able to buy a computer. Buying tools to program the computer was from American companies when you might have heard of the dollar to Argentinian peso problems, completely intractable. And when I discovered open source, my dad and I were obsessed with this idea of how can we hack this computer? How can we do more with it?
And what kind of computer was it? I gotta know.
It was basically the when you had the CPU tower.
Mm-hmm.
And the CRT monitor and
Pentium era or 46? Pentium era. Yeah, I had you pegged.
And Windows 95. That places me. I was born in 1990, so I think I was 7 or 8 years old when we first got that computer, and the first problem was getting software running on it.
Yeah,
and then building software. So my dad had this awesome idea of could you build your own software? And then so the idea was very, very impactful in my mind, but the how really difficult.
What was your dad's background? How did he come?
He was an industrial engineer, so he would always like to think in terms of systems.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of fell in love with the idea that software was going to eat the world and replace. He would make jokes about my degree is useless. This software thing is going to be way bigger. My mom was a chemical engineer. she wasn't like drinking that Kool-Aid yet, but my dad would always also tell her,
But engineering in the house,
yeah,
definitely.
engineering background in the house, and
Mm.
get your degree as a way of, which is actually kind of ironic given my dropping out of high school later story. But the idea in the household was their parents were even from a lower class family, very challenged economically, and so their way to escape that was getting the degree in the public university, becoming an engineer. But then for me, it was software. And so getting to program the computer was so freaking difficult, even just to get a hello world
I
going.
know. I remember.
And I fell in love with platforms and operating systems that made programming a first class citizen, meaning this is not just a thing for consuming, this is also a platform for building.
Yeah.
And Windows was not that.
Not at
Linux was
all.
that. And so when I installed Linux onto the computer, well, now the tools are not only free and open source, they come with a computer. Riddle me that. Like, how cool is that?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so for me,
Yes, like
open
a what was
source,
that? Red Hat Linux on a CD,
yeah,
probably?
Red Hat Linux and a CD was kind of the thing that made Linux palatable enough that we could even get it installed.
How'd you
But
get
now
the
it's
CD? I wanna know how you got the CD.
the CD came from a magazine. I still remember. So if you go to Argentina, there is, and maybe there's not there anymore, but they had a good life. There would be all this like magazine kiosks on the streets. They actually look really cool. Kind of like, you sometimes see a telephone booth and you're like, oh, that's so like cute. That's so iconic. This was Argentina with the magazine stands, and we saw one that had the Linux Penguin. I remember it like it was yesterday, and
Wow.
it came with a CD to install. The hotness at the time was graphical user interfaces to Linux, because Linux grew being basically a low level system, a kernel, right? And the pedantic thing that people always point out is, oh, it's not just Linux, it's GNU Linux. It's the kernel plus tools.
Yeah.
And so this is all very bare bones. And what people really wanted was a turnkey solution. And so Red Hat came out. It was the first thing we tried. I actually could not find my footing on it. It almost felt like I was dealing with like easy mode Linux. And there was something in the Linux communities that I started to join, which was, it was an elitism to like, what distribution do you use?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But Red Hat did get me more into this hacker mindset and tinkering more with the computer and dual booting operating systems so that you get a computer. How cool would it be if it can run Linux and run Windows so that my
Yeah.
mom can still find some utility in the computer that we just spent a lot of money on? And so I got into dual booting Windows and Linux. But the Debian distribution of Linux was when I kind of really became like a full-time hacker, and I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
But open source really was about opening up this new world of creation, having the ability to fork other people's work. So one of my most successful early programming ventures was the fact, not that I started a project entirely from scratch. You can't do that realistically when you're like 10 years old. But it's the fact that I was able to copy and download source that already existed and work
Mhm.
on top of it. That was revolutionary for me. And
Yeah.
so the combination of tools that were there and free and available, plus the fact that there was all of these examples and templates and projects that you could just download and run, was really what opened a lot of possibilities for me.
So a lot of people in the tech industry have an origin story like this. Maybe on a different. Not everyone wound up on Debian. Some people were free ABSD or whatever it was. So of course, people come from different eras and on different hardware and different software. But this open source was the pathway into technology for so many people, and yet, frankly, very few of them have contributed anything meaningfully back to that community. And what I've seen over the course of my career is, there was a time when using open source was controversial in
Yep.
business. Because what about the licensing? What about this? And what about that? And people felt the need to own and operate their own software. And there was kind of a recognition that doesn't make sense. Of course, you should take advantage of this incredible commons. But I feel like the idea that you should then be a steward of that and give back to it has not really penetrated into most tech companies. And so I wonder, how did you like? At what point did you get the idea that one day you would have a chance to contribute back into that community?
Yeah, contributing was very natural to me, because the amazing thing about open source is that you're always learning. You're always improving the software. Anything that you don't like, you can customize yourself. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
really powerful thing. And when you use open source software, you have this natural gravitas to get closer to the people that build that software. You can send a patch, you can go and ask a question. The how it works is not just fixed manuals and documentation. In fact, the very first thing that people can contribute to open source with is making a documentation fix. So if you're using a project and you look up something and it's not quite perfect, go and open a pull request, which is sort of how you send a proposal of a fix to that maintainer, and then that starts building community.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got started contributing. So my journey was that I started out trying a lot of different backend programming languages, low level programming languages, but I fell in love with the web, and I fell in love with the presentation layer.
Mm.
So I've always been sort of a design centric person. Like I love software that looks and feels good. And the ironic thing about this is that I actually ended up migrating from Linux to Mac OS when I was a teenager, because Mac OS found this balance between that hackability that we talked about and being able to install compilers and developer tools, etc. It builds on Darwin, which is a Unix-like operating system, but it had this beauty of perfect user experience, and everything is well integrated, and I'm not fighting the drive, the kernel modules. In fact, one of my biggest points of pride growing up was when I finally was able to compile the right module for the kernel to support our internet connection at home. This is like a big, like I finally was
I
able to
remember. Finally, yeah, exactly.
upgrade from dial-up to DSL, and I needed to dynamically load a Linux kernel module with a utility called modprobe. And so going through that journey, I learned a lot. But at one point, I was starting to build products for people. I was starting to do freelance work for people. I was starting to help my family financially with all the things that I learned. And I found myself always fighting this like user experience layer. I just needed things to be more ergonomic and streamlined.
Yeah.
And so I migrated to the Mac. At about that time, I started contributing to this project called MooTools, which is building a library for better user interfaces that happen to have a lot of influence. And so this is the beautiful thing about open source. So you create a project, and then lo and behold, tomorrow it's becoming foundational to some great new company. And so MooTools was that for Facebook. I was 17. Actually, when I started contributing to this thing, I was 15, 16 years old.
Wow.
And I was starting to have impact in source that would inspire and find its way into companies like Facebook, who ended up becoming one of the largest companies in the world. And I was just some random guy in Argentina. And so contributing to open source opens up all of these doors. Obviously, you have to select the right project. You have to make meaningful contributions. This little group of JavaScript people were a little like hard to access. Like the bar to contribution was pretty high. Like you had to this is not my first rodeo even contributing to open source, but that was an example of how
Mm-hmm.
open source for me started blending into business, started blending into having like commercial outcomes. It started building into, hey, this is not just a toy project. This is something that could be on the critical path of the future of the internet.
So, how did you wind up in Silicon Valley from Argentina?
Yeah, so that project really was pivotal. Not just because of the Facebook outreach. I was like super flattered that a recruiter from Facebook in the early days reached out, and then they found out, oh, never mind, you're 17 and you're not even in the United States.
Yeah.
And but then a startup based out of Switzerland said, oh, I'm also going all in on MooTools, and we need to recruit experts. So let's go find out where the experts are. And so what do you do? Which, by the way, Vercel even still does. Like when we want to recruit talent, we look for open source contributions.
Of course.
And so they went to the, about page of the open source project. They went to the Git commit history, the sort of logs of who's contributing to this project. They found me, and they did take a bet. Some people from the MooTools team helped me, but they're like, yeah, this guy, never mind his age, he really knows his stuff. And so this company from Switzerland hired me. I had a lot of influence and impact over their front end. So I kind of rewrote it from scratch. It was super productive. They were really happy with me. They opened an office here in Silicon Valley. And that led to me not just realizing that my open source code could have a lot of influence in like building my own personal reputation, but when I came to Silicon Valley at the right time and right place, I discovered that open source could also be the fuel for building startups.
Mm-hmm.
So I started my first startup, and that's when like my biggest open source projects started coming out. One was called Socket.io, which, for example, when Notion launched, when Perplexity launched, when even Microsoft on the Office on the web launched, they all used Socket.io as one of the critical
They have
components.
to have it.
And Mongoose, and we made really big bets into this emerging project called Node.js. So that's when like open source and startups, that world started coming together for me.
When did you think that you could become an entrepreneur? Like, how did the idea come into your mind?
Yeah, that's all credit goes to San Francisco. You could find breadcrumbs of the idea even in my early days. Like I had business ideas a lot. Like in middle school, I was burning CD-ROMs. I was like selling literally in the playground. I remember I was like making CDs of music that people liked, and then selling the CDs to my. I was actually selling it to the parents. I was using my fellow students
Wow,
as a
that's
conduit.
fascinating.
They would bring the pesos, the little bills to the
Uh-huh.
playground, and I would give them. It was almost like a drug deal transaction.
You were their
Uh,
CD-ROM dealer. That's hilarious.
here's don't let the teacher see it. Here's the CD. Actually, I would get in trouble for things like that. So I always had like if I really spent a lot of time thinking to my past, I would have all these like little business ideas. I was very entrepreneurial. I had sold even websites. I remember I sold a website on eBay one time. I had built a whole website on top of open source technologies. It was really cool. And then I sold it for like, I don't know, like $600.
How did
You
you
could
get the
sell.
idea to put it on eBay?
So I think it was because it might have been the Justin TV thing. At some point, someone said like, we sold a website. Oh no, before Justin TV, I think the founders had sold. So the story is Twitch was previously Justin
Mhm.
TV, was previously, I think, a calendar app or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
And they'd sold it on eBay. That might have been too late, but this is the thing at one point. People were selling websites on eBay. And I
Yeah.
was like, I could
You
sell
had
websites
heard
on
of
eBay
that. You'd
too.
heard of that on the internet, basically, and you thought you would try
Yeah.
it. That's amazing.
A lot of this was basically because of those communities that I was building. So you need to find yourself in the right, the business adage of like, you have to find yourself in the right room. On the internet, you have to find yourself in the right chat room, the right Discord, the right IRC server, the right Slack. A lot of cool things happen when you're in the right chat room,
Yeah, those
essentially.
communities create tremendous value. And again,
It's amazing.
we're completely blind to that.
Or in the right forum. So I was
Yeah.
big into like Linux forums, and there was a Linux forum for Argentina, and I built great relationships there. People would give me tips. Oh, there's this new platform you should try out. There's this new website you should try out. And so someone at some point, I think, pointed out the eBay thing. I didn't go deep into it. It was actually quite prolific. I like built the website, sold it, moved on to the next thing. So it was
Mhm.
always kind of entrepreneurial, but Silicon Valley and San Francisco is like that inspiration for like you can do things and you can start companies on steroids. It's hard for me to explain just how different it was. And I had this interesting contrast. So I think I'm an interesting patient zero to study because I'd never left Argentina before.
Mhm.
I'd never, other than Brazil, I'd never left the country. And then I quickly went from Argentina to Switzerland to the US. I started getting invited to conferences throughout the world, and I flew to Berlin for JSConf, and I started getting a lot of this exposure. And so I had this rapid fire A/B test of the different cultures as it pertains to entrepreneurship and technology. And comparing the US to Europe was like crazy to me because growing up in Argentina, I almost had the opposite belief that, Argentina looks up to Europe a lot.
Mhm.
And so my family looked up to America because my parents were engineers, and they had, they had seen what it was like to work with the American engineering companies, and they'd already fallen in love. But the Argentinian culture was more leaning towards like Europe is super cool. But then I saw them back to back, and it was like, okay, if I need to move fast and I need to build a technology company, this San Francisco thing is like a drug. And so that's kind of what it was, just the culture and the environment that opened up my eyes to like, oh, I can start my own company.
Is that why you went to San Francisco in the first place, or was that serendipity?
Serendipity. I remember one high school lesson on Silicon Valley from a cracked geography professor. The class was geography.
Uh-huh.
And she used it as a proxy to like kind of expose us to like more of the anthropology or other like adjacent fields of study. And so we studied Silicon Valley. But you know what? My understanding of it was that it was more on the hardware side.
Yeah.
My perception was that this is more like, this is not here in the city. And so that transition was happening at the time that I arrived. Naval says, you know, all of my alpha in investing happened when I left the outskirts, the neighborhoods, and I went to the city, and then Twitter was being born in the city.
Yeah.
I even have a fun fact. So my first startup office, once I graduated from our co-working space, which is where the idea of even starting a company was born, was in a building at 300 Brennan.
Sure, I know that building.
And by coincidence, we ended up in the little office space that had previously been used to host Audio.
Mm-hmm.
Audio was the podcast app ahead of its time, arguably, that pivoted into Twitter. And so this is the magic of Silicon Valley in the San Francisco shape, that you were just right there when all of these new companies were being born in the Web 2.0 / cloud era.
There's something magical about being in a company town where the industry is innovation and where those companies are demystified, because Audio to you, all of a sudden, it's no longer this legendary story. It's an office. It's a place. You can walk right into the place that
You
used
go to
to
the
be.
office throwing parties, and the CEO is there hanging out. He'll answer any question you have. And obviously, people have limited time, but I think everyone's almost pretty much open to just meeting with anybody. In fact, if anything, I prefer to meet with the people that are having the fresh ideas, not the people that are having the ancient
Tell me about
ideas.
it. Oh my God. That's
So
cool.
you would think, oh, as a CEO, I'm excited to like meet the Pope. Maybe I am actually, but you're actually way more excited to meet the 2-person company that has this revolutionary new idea, and you want to partner with them, or you want to invest in them, and you want to learn from them, etc.
Yeah, that openness, that tolerance is like such a critical part of the culture of Silicon Valley, and it's been well researched. I don't know if you ever read the book Regional Advantage, but one of the old classic book about how in the hardware era Silicon Valley became that way. There's a lot of good research that shows that those softer cultural attributes are why Silicon Valley is where it is and why it was able to outcompete other regions.
And that's yeah. And by the way, that's something I spent a lot of time thinking about, because being from Argentina and being extremely bullish, optimistic, and supportive of the startup ecosystem, I do always go back to culture. There's a lot that you can copy that is tactical. So you can say, look, in order to have a Silicon Valley, you need to have a bunch of angel investors. And so I actually literally just invested in an angel investor in Europe. So that I want to, try and infuse some of that, some of the things that I've seen work here and other places in the world. But there's something cultural about speed, velocity, openness, risk taking, that it's just really hard to even pinpoint. What is it? Where did it come from? How do you translate it to another environment, et cetera?
So let's talk about the founding of Vercel. You were in the co-working space. You were in San Francisco. You kind of had this idea that you could be an entrepreneur. Like, how did it come about?
Yeah, one of the key things that happened, since we were just speaking of open source, was in my previous startup before Vercel, I started noticing that by launching the open source projects of the technology that I was using to build my startup. So to be clear, I was building a startup initially in edtech, and I was building it with open source technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I created open source technology of my own, like Socket.io. And then this was actually quite surprising to us. Because we're open sourcing, there was this gravitas that built around our startup. We're getting access to better talent. We're getting a lot of attention. We're getting the thing that people actually always fight for is attention is all you need, right? Like, how can I get eyeballs, interest, hype, buzz, hiring talent, whatever? How can I become a talent magnet? And I do think this is all very hard to do, but if there was a cheat code, I would say it's open source. And it's not that we did it because we were seeking those things. We did it for open source. And then those were the consequences or the outputs. And so the thing that really stood out was that I started noticing that investors were pointing that out. Investors
Mm.
saying, like, I remember getting this email from an investor saying, like, oh, I saw that thing you guys just launched. That's super interesting. And so they were not reaching out specifically about the other things that we were building. They were reaching out about, like, this open source thing seems to have pretty extraordinary traction. And so going back to like giving credit to Silicon Valley, investors were open-minded that you could put venture dollars into open source and then build another business that's separate from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up pivoting that business. I sold it to the perennial open source success story, which was WordPress and WordPress.com at the time. And then I was like extremely convinced when I was there, okay, you can totally build a business with open source. I wanted to do it a bit differently from WordPress because WordPress built an open source project and then they built another product, WordPress.com. What I wanted to do, I was obsessed with this idea of the cloud is the future of the internet. WordPress is not using the cloud, which is really interesting. They had their own data centers. And I felt the pain of that. Things were more difficult when you wanted to have a new idea because you didn't have this snappiness of converting idea into live infra. And so when I left, I decided, okay, I'm going to create open source again. I wanted to create a framework that ended up be called Next.js to make it really easy to create web applications. But also, I want to simplify the cloud infrastructure problem. So AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, awesome platforms. But if you were like me, even a seasoned engineer that had an idea and wanted to deploy it, it would take weeks, months.
Oh, it's a real pain, yeah.
It was a real pain. And by the way, like there were like 200 different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
So it was almost like a myth. Like somebody has the sacred chant that you can invoke. And if you say it and hold it the right way, then the cloud really bestows you with its full power. And I rejected that notion. I was like, no. It can be just one command. That was my obsession as an engineer, as that Linux background of mine of I loved commands. I loved terminals. And so imagine that you could just say one word, enter, and then your application is live, worldwide, fast, reliable, secure, etc. And so it's so fun. It's a small idea, and it's an infinitely sized idea, right? It's a small idea because it's like, I'm just saying that I'm going to build one command. Relax. Like, I'm just going to give it to a developer and I'm going to make their life easy. And it's an infinitely sized idea because our ambition is to simplify all of the cloud. It's to simplify building applications so that everybody in the world can do it. It's so that now this command can be given to agents. And so anybody with an idea can vibe code it, and then they'll deploy it in the world's most reliable and fastest infrastructure. And so these days, I'm so excited about AI and vibe coding because my original idea was, and so much of this was given to this exposure that I had, because like I didn't work at Facebook, but I was working very closely with them because of open source.
Yeah.
And I was noticing that the gap between how Facebook was building and how the rest of the world was building kept getting like wider and wider and wider. And there was even almost like a risk for the web.
Explain what you mean. What was the gap?
The gap was that, number one, Facebook was deploying thousands of times per day.
Yeah.
And you would go to the average company who was trying to launch something online, and they were like, oh yeah, I deploy once a year.
No, you already said it. Windows 95. Remember when we used to put the year that a product came out in the name of the name of the product?
That's such a wonderful observation.
Yeah.
In fact, some companies still inherit that, right? Like they call their versions and their releases, they put dates into it. And now Facebook is like, no. We're experimenting. We have branches of experiments. Like it's almost like they have a quantum superposition of software where some users get some version and then some users get some other version.
Oh yeah.
And then their teams get to make business decisions. Their engineers are actually not just like quote unquote code monkeys. They're they're making business optimization decisions. They're saying, oh, a user that does this and is in this branch of the experiment performs better. And I was realizing that even that language was completely absent, even in the customers of the cloud, because they were operating at such a low level of abstraction. The cloud emerged as almost like being the data center, but in the cloud, like the
Right.
virtual data center. And then what I saw as an opportunity is that I don't want people to manage data centers.
Right.
I want them to build products. I want them to be successful on the web. I want them to iterate very quickly. And so that was the gap that I identified. And there were so many other things like onboarding time. The thing that these companies like Facebook and Google optimized for is if you join their company, how quickly could you actually ship something?
Mm-hmm.
So even something small that gives you a taste for what productivity is like, what our culture is like.
Mm-hmm.
And so you join. How long does it take you to get the tools and set up the development environment? It's almost like a throwback to those days of me getting a computer and being able to say, so
Oh yeah.
how do I program this thing? If you have a company, that's happening to your engineers today, and you probably don't notice it, that you hire them, and then the time from batch access to live
First deployment, yeah.
value added to the world, it's probably measured in breaking news, sad news, potentially. It's probably measured in weeks.
Oh no.
It's
Oh,
probably measured in
no.
days. By the way, I'm saying this even optimistically. It might be even measured in months. And it could be seconds. It could be minutes. In fact, with companies like Vercel, because so much of what we build is open source, people that join Vercel already have a sense of how to contribute to Vercel before they join. I remember I astonished another CEO one day because I told them, yeah, man, I'm super pilled. We just hired this incredible engineer from Israel, and he just shipped one of the most exciting things in the company 2 weeks in. And it's like, no, that's not possible. He literally,
Yeah.
this is a hot company that Sequoia had just invested in. He's like, no, that's not possible. It's like, no, what do you mean that's not possible? Well, and by the way, he came from a really good place because he was saying if he's shipping something on the critical infrastructure path, it would almost sound irresponsible to ship something to
Exactly.
every user of a platform with millions of customers in 2 weeks. But the cheat code here was that this person had been exposed to Vercel's culture,
Mm-hmm.
source
Mm-hmm.
code, engineering, bar for months or years prior to that moment. And so that's another, you were talking about those
Mm-hmm.
positive externalities
Exactly.
of the world. A positive externality of corporations and quote unquote big tech, which sounds like a scary word, like Google, Facebook, etc., is that they contribute a lot to open source. In fact, I really believe that they do this because of that emergent positive externality, not because there is pressure to. So a good example would be Next.js was built on an open source technology that Facebook open source called React.
Mm-hmm.
If React had not existed, Vercel would not exist.
Right.
And so, and they did that because there were so many positive externalities to open sourcing React. They wanted to attract more talent.
Yeah.
They wanted to build an ecosystem around it. They wanted the talent that they would hire to already be familiar with the tools.
That's such an underrated consequence. And it's interesting. You're like laying out step by step this principle that we've talked about a couple times in the podcast. And we talked to Sid from GitLab and Matt Mullenweg. So, we've had a few open source companies on the podcast, and this comes up every time. And the principle I call is harder is easier. Because when I counsel people to start a company, and I love the way you talked about the simple idea that is like infinitely deep, it's so much easier to push the complexity onto the user. But it's like, no, we're going to do the harder work to make it as simple as possible. It'd be a lot easier, quote unquote, to keep all your technology to yourself and make sure that you
Totally.
capture all the value that you create. But no, we're going to take the harder thing and build a
It's so much
community to do open
harder
source.
to build with open source. And for
Much,
us, not for the
much
users.
harder.
For the users, it's so delightful. But
Yeah.
for us, we have to keep in mind so many environments and constraints, and we collaborate with other vendors because Next.js can be deployed to every cloud platform in the world.
Right. And when you release a new version of Next.js, you potentially make your competitors stronger too.
We do.
It's like,
actively.
how can you
remember
how can you do that?
I remember the first time that I was immensely proud of a customer of Next.js that was not on Vercel, and I realized this customer will never be on Vercel. It was one of the largest news sites. It was actually one of the largest websites in the world. It was the largest news site in China. It was the mobile version of, they were rebuilding their front end. It
How
was,
cool.
I think it was like m.qq.net or something like this. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm so proud. And also they're never going to be my customer because they're in China, because there's geopolitical things that I have only got. My prediction was, it's going to take us maybe decades to get into that market. And that ended up being true because there's so many geopolitical concerns,
Yeah.
and
With
the
barriers.
cloud infrastructure works differently, and there's just so much for Vercel to do in North America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in South America, and we just haven't gotten there yet. And so you get so much value still from collaborating with these people, from building an ecosystem around these projects, from getting more partners and vendors invested. But to your point, it's hard mode. For me, the builder, it's
Yeah.
hard mode.
It's hard mode. And yet, but people don't seem to connect these two things together, because like, I love that story you told about the person who told you that what you were actually doing was impossible. I get that all the time. I've been told the thing I'm already done is impossible. I'm like, well, if it's already been done, it's obviously possible. Like, what are you talking about? People react that way when they experience something that violates their ideological priors. So
Totally.
here we know business has to be cutthroat. We know exploitivity is
Totally.
strength. We know right, and yet you're getting all these counterintuitive benefits, and people think like, oh, it's just some weird one-off. No, it's a principle.
There are so many weird ideological like inertia that in people's minds. So there's so many things that Apple and Google and Facebook get wrong in my mind. But I'll give you an example of something that Google has done that is amazing. Google Chrome is a project that if I had to recruit and pay the engineers that built it, would cost billions of dollars. It's an engineering marvel. It's a revolutionary JavaScript engine V8,
Mm-hmm.
a new virtual machine written from scratch, a rendering engine written from scratch, a font rendering engine written from scratch, a 3D engine, or like Skia, their 2D, 3D rendering surface written from scratch. It's like an operating system almost.
Yeah.
The network stack written from scratch. And all of this was open sourced and packaged in a way where all of the competitors of Google Chrome can literally just copy paste it.
Mm-hmm.
So you see new web browsers these days, like Dia, like Brave, like Perplexity's Comet. All of these browsers just copy pasted the infinite engineering work of the hardest to recruit engineers on the planet. Anybody can build their own web browser now. It's freaking amazing. And so obviously there's a lot of regulatory concerns about when you have such a strong market position like they have with Google search and Chrome,
Yeah.
etc. And we should study what are the right, boundaries around that.
Mm-hmm.
But the open source element of these companies is so underrated. And this is true of Vercel as well, because as we grow, people do get that perception of like, oh, I thought this company was like 10,000 engineers and you're in like some dark cave, we sometimes get from time to time, which is like, I don't know if it's a rite of passage or not, we get the big tech stamp on us.
You get treated like that.
And so you have to remember that open source is extremely expensive, extremely hard to do. We really try to do our best. We work with other vendors in making all these projects better. But I do get a lot of delight from knowing that one day some competitor will take all of this, and that's great. It's so much better for humanity and so much better for civilization than if they had to start from scratch again and again and again and again. In fact, a funny thing about Next.js is that it was competing with Facebook's own flavor of what a framework on top of React would look like.
Mm-hmm.
They created something called Create React App, CRA.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, we outcompeted CRA. Obviously, they knocked it out of the park with React. So kudos to them. And so the fact that you can like cooperate and compete with these companies is just amazing.
Yeah, it's a much more sophisticated understanding of where business value actually comes from. But I think there's some listeners probably are not that familiar with Next.js and probably not that familiar with Vercel. So just tell us a little bit about the success of Vercel. Like, you obviously you were able to raise money. The company's gotten pretty big. Just give a sense of what that trajectory has been like.
Yeah, I always start with customers, right? Vercel ultimately is a means to an end. It's you have an idea and you want to create a successful product and you want to make it that as easy as possible. So I always, try to work backwards from like, what are customers doing with this platform? So you have OpenAI. Anytime you go to openai.com, which is now one of the top 20 websites on the internet, you're touching a Vercel. Their engineers chose Vercel because the frameworks are easy to use, the cloud deployment story is easy to use, and they have massive scale.
Yeah.
So when they do their Super Bowl ad, or when things go viral, or GPT-7 gets released, you need to bank on rock solid infrastructure. And so that's what Vercel provides. It's not just the ease of use, it's the ease of use plus the best practices on how to build for the web. And so these best practices are downstream from, in some cases, I'll again keep giving credit where credit is due. We borrowed a lot of the homework from Google, Facebook, Amazon that dictated in many ways, like they invented the principles of how to build software at scale, that gap that I talked about, right? And bridging it. Now, the bad news for them is that used to be their competitive advantage. Vercel is making it such that ease of deployment is no longer a competitive advantage of like, oh, I need to join
Because you bring
Google.
it to everybody.
I really want to bring it to everybody hardcore. And so companies like OpenAI or Nintendo or Porsche, Chick-fil-A, what's interesting is sometimes it's user facing. So like you go to a .com and Vercel is powering that. Sometimes it's behind the scenes. So, for Chick-fil-A, we power the systems and logistics and optimizations that make it so that their sandwiches are yummier and delivered on time, and they can scale their business to thousands of stores. We help companies to scale internationally, right? So we power Under Armour. And so Under Armour is an amazing brand that, they're possibly when they had the idea for it, the way that people would buy the product was you go to a mall and you
Sure.
choose,
It's a totally different world now. Yeah.
and you choose the sneaker that you want in real life, in the physical world. The battleground now is eyeballs on the internet, is eyeballs for agents. How can I help companies like weather.com? Not only do they run weather.com on Vercel, but also as agents start consuming their data. There's a lot of talk about the new protocol of the internet, MCP.
Yeah.
Every URL on the internet until today starts with HTTP. Most people don't know what the hell that is. Maybe they know .com, but the other part of the URL is HTTP. That is the protocol of the internet for humans. The internet of agents is gaining this new protocol called MCP. And so what I'm helping companies these days is by leveraging what we call the AI cloud. The AI cloud is where you build the new kinds of applications that are going to help your company stay relevant and thrive in the next 100 years. You're going to be able to create agents. You're going to be able to create your own ChatGPT. You're going to be able to create your own mid-journey. So I think the world of the internet belongs to agents. Humans always seek the easy way. Take my problem off my plate. And so Vercel is evolving to be the place where companies like OpenAI and all these AI juggernauts, but not just the juggernauts, the newcomers, the AI startups, and the companies like Weather that need to get their new next step of their evolution on the internet deployed very easily as well.
I think it's really interesting because Vercel is very much associated in people's minds with AI. And yet the company predates AI, right? You didn't start it to be an AI company. Well, tell us a bit about how did Vercel and AI, like I feel like there was this convergence where this became the preferred tool of AI vendors and it kind of became associated with the AI revolution, so much so that I've had people mistakenly call Vercel an AI model company to me. Not
Yeah,
they actually got confused. Like it's so integrated that people actually have gotten confused about what it is. Like, how did that happen, and what's that been like to be part of this just incredible tornado of activity?
Yeah, so there's been a couple of things. One is that idea that I mentioned in the beginning, which is like idea to live. Idea to live. That was the thing that we were optimizing for. We're trying to not get too stuck in one technology.
Yeah.
People, investors at the time were very puzzled about why I was not calling the company Next.js.com.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
a workable pattern here is you create a cool open source project, Next.js.org, and then you create the .com. But I always saw Next.js almost like as a means to an end. If tomorrow I could come up with something better, you would be the first to hear it because I'm more invested in the end user outcome. And that's kind of how I was blessed that I found that path when I was learning software engineering. I found that way of building that was more like user centric rather than technology centric. So I think part of that is in the DNA of the company. Another thing that happened is I think it was our Series B investor. I think it was GV, so Google Ventures. So the partner from GV reached out to us. We weren't even raising money. They reached out to us and they were like, look, every single pitch that's coming through our door is a URL that ends in .vercel.app. What the hell is going on here? Why are all these startups building on .vercel.app? So for context for the listeners, when you haven't yet even shipped your final project, maybe you haven't even named the thing. It doesn't even have a .com or .io or .ai yet. We give you a temporary URL called .vercel.app. And Google was noticing that in their venture arm, people were coming, and obviously the catnip for investors is early stage companies, right? Like you want to find it as early as possible. It's like finding gold. And so all these early stage entrepreneurs were coming with these Vercel URLs. And then, kudos to the investor that was like, they didn't need data. Or the data itself was the fact that everyone's building on this platform. And so what ended up happening was that any new wave of technology, this is what they pointed out to me. And I was very happy because it was like, thanks for giving me that nugget. They were saying that every time there's a new wave of innovation, we're noticing it's being built on Vercel. So at the time, a lot of it was Web3 and crypto. And so we live in accelerating times. Anytime there is new alpha in the market, software companies chase it immediately. It's happened to me that I see ideas get posted on Twitter, and literally 2 hours later, there's a startup, usually built on Vercel. I one time took a screenshot of someone had the idea, and the Twitter algorithm gave me both the idea and the startup as a response to that idea in a gap of 2 hours. And so we created the platform where whenever there is something new to build, people are gravitating towards this thing. And so we were very early in noticing that the new thing that people were building was not just, SaaS UIs and dashboards and the traditional, people call it CRUD, create, read, update, delete type of applications where you have a database and you build the interface. We're starting to notice that people had the model and they were building the interfaces and they were building the plumbing and they were
AI model, you mean?
That's right. That's right. It was what Karpathy calls the transition from software 1.0 to software 2.0. Software 1.0 is algorithms, data structures, determinism, predictability. Software 2.0 is Pandora box, training, neural networks, weights, probability distributions.
Yeah.
And so we're paying attention, right? And because also we're very customer centric. I'm an idea guy. I come up with a lot of ideas because I still write code myself and whatever. But when you see all these startups, all these creators, all these innovators hit the rough edges of your platform, you pay attention. I actually get more value from someone breaking something in Vercel. If a listener here ever runs into an error on Vercel or finds a quirky edge, you know who to email, ceo@vercel.com. So we'll bump that to the top priority of my list. And so I started noticing AI companies running into a few rough edges. They needed compute to work slightly differently. I'll give you a very concrete example. When Vercel was born, the hotness was that the fastest you make your application, like Amazon.com was the poster child of this. If you make Amazon.com really, really fast, you make a lot of money. And there's almost like a perfect correlation between loading performance and money. And by the way, this is still a winning formula. I just posted some insane statistics of a major household name in the US, that it's a company that's over 100 years old. They moved to Vercel to reinvent themselves online, and the numbers are astronomical in terms of conversion improvements, in terms of
Just from the latency improvement.
average order value, bounce rate. The numbers just speak for themselves. It's like, at this point, it's almost like actuarial math. It's performance goes in, money goes out. And that's the thesis under which Amazon Web Services was born. We need to give this superpower to the rest of the world. But with AI, things are changing. So of course you want the fast things, but also, have you noticed that you actually sometimes get more value from the AI thinking for longer?
Right. It's different.
It's super counterintuitive. You go to ChatGPT and you tell it deep research as long as you want, man. Like, I just need the right answer.
Just get me the right answer. Get me the right answer.
So that is the compute paradigm that Vercel was privy to. We noticed the demand for that because people were hitting all the limits of our platform. And so that's why you associate it now with, all of these AI comments are born here, because they don't even notice that it just works better for the use case. But we're constantly optimizing behind the scenes. We call this the AI cloud because AI cloud has almost like a perfect metaphor. Every service that we're building has a perfect metaphor to the cloud 1.0. It's kind of like the cloud version of that Carpathy software 1.0 to software 2.0 movement of, yes, the software 1.0 or cloud 1.0 had a CDN, but it was a CDN for web pages. Great. I have the fastest horse for you. Please come use it at Vercel. But now there is a rocket instead of the horse. We have the CDN for models. We have the CDN for tokens. We call it the Vercel AI Gateway. So now we have the easiest way on the planet to infuse intelligence into your applications. So if you're Under Armour or if you're weather, now you're not just rendering pixels. You're infusing intelligence into your applications.
Talk a little bit about the company building philosophy as you've grown, because Vercel, it's not a tiny company anymore, and you've gotten to some pretty significant scale. I heard you talk about recursive founder mode. Can you explain what is recursive founder mode to start?
So for the uninitiated, founder mode is the meme that went viral from a Paul Graham article that recognized that founders can be quirky. Too quirky is a bad thing, but founders can be impatient, anxious, somewhat like disruptive to their own processes, and they have this energy to them that is actually good. So thanks, Paul Graham, for writing that article from position of authority, because it was a recognition that founder mode energy is actually an engine of progress.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes you can build so much support, so many support functions around this founder, so much infrastructure around this founder. I can even draw a parallel to the world of when you go hard mode into building infra in the low-level clouds like AWS and Google, you might actually fall victim to this. You created so much ossified infra that you cannot innovate anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, that configuration of Kubernetes and whatever, that's not what works for the AI application that we need to build now. And so there's an equivalent to that in companies where there's so much rigor, process, functions, SVPs, VPs that report to the EVPs or the original SVP that reports to the original VP. And now the founder says, hey, by the way, guys, I tested out the app and it doesn't work. Like, hello, it doesn't work.
Let's not have a meeting about which managers to put on having a meeting to schedule the meeting. Let's actually fix the problem.
By the way, Bill Gates has a famous email that he sent to everyone at Microsoft, and this is founder mode before it was called founder mode. Mm-hmm, I think it was about him not being able to play a video. So he was testing. People should look this up, by the way. It's glorious.
We'll put a link in the show notes. Yeah.
He was testing Windows Media Player. Mm-hmm. But here's the magic thing that he did. He wasn't just testing Windows Media Player. He was testing the end-to-end thing. He put himself in the shoes of a user of computers. The user of computer wants to play a video. But what do they need to do first? Well, they need to turn the computer on. remember when computers had this bootstrapping process, like this loading
Sure.
screen that
Yeah, yeah,
vomits text, gray text in a black screen and whatever.
yeah,
And then the computer comes in, but it's not ready yet.
yeah,
It's you have to log into the computer, and then you have to find the application. And then you have, and so what Bill finds is, oh, the computer wants to auto update itself. Oh, the auto update just asked me to restart the computer. But I was just gonna watch a video. No, 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 no.
right.
Relax.
No, you have to
Bill,
restart. Sorry.
you have to install the Service Pack 3 2018.3.4, and you have to restart the computer 3 times. And oh, now you have to upgrade the Windows Media Player. And this and this and this. And so founder mode is really the antidote to that, is that someone says this is nonsense and gets the wheels of the company turning. But my iteration on this is that if you rely solely on that, and my response to this was almost instant after the article comes out, because I had been doing that for so long that I already also hit the diminishing returns of this, is that
Mhm.
you can't just piggyback on founder alone, especially if you
Yeah,
want to build a generational company, a company that will, stand the test of time. You can't just rely on like cracked founder, online 24/7, whatever. So what I call nested founder mode or recursive founder mode is that, could you empower people to act like founders within the company?
yeah.
And so what Vercel has done is that we've acquired founders. Sometimes it's like literally one-person companies
Mhm.
or two-person companies. And we don't just acquire them and then we tell them get in line with everyone else that wants to ship, or get in line and fit into this process, or report to this VP of SVP of regional VP
Yeah,
of EVP. We actually give them the space to be CEO of that unit and product within Vercel. And I, as founder mode, I try to not make it so that they're shipping the org chart. So this is the counterbalance that I need to put in. I want people to ship, but they need to ship a congruent product. So you can't ship Windows Media Player over here, and the kernel over here, and the operating system over here. I think this is what Steve Jobs nailed. That was kind of the chink in the armor for Bill Gates, is that, yeah, at the end of the day, this need to be highly cohesive,
yeah.
integrated products.
Most people think that's incompatible with the level of edge empowerment that you're talking about. So
And
how
it
do you square
absolutely
that
is not.
circle?
It's hard work for sure. It's what you were talking about earlier. Like,
Mhm.
because Next is not the only open source project that we support. And so you have to find a way to delight in that Apple way, but not create a walled garden. And so that is the next frontier. Can you deliver on the promise of user experience and ease of use without also inheriting all the bad parts? The part where Apple tells you that you have to have, all these requirements in order to publish to the App Store, and they can cut you off at any time, and
Yeah.
the APIs are limited, and all of these things.
So how do you decide? I call it having the moral authority. To me, the key part of the founder mode story is there's somebody in the organization who has the power, the moral authority, to violate the company's own processes in pursuit of some higher goal. So recursive founder mode means delegating that power to other people in the organization. So how do you decide who's worthy of holding the golden sword?
I try to find people that have all those cultural traits embedded in them before they join Vercel. I don't. So this is given to me as a incredible piece of wisdom by one of the earliest designers at Facebook, Soleo, who, among other things, designed the like button and many of the things that people interact with like trillions of times a day. And one of the
Hmm.
things he said was like, look, values of a company are not things that you write on a tablet, and then when someone joins, you're like, all right, erase all of your previous values. Here's our values. Install them into your operating system, please. And
Yeah.
so much of what we do is not just a screening for like you really cracked at algorithms. In fact, arguably, there's so much diminishing value to that, right? Like AI, and people are, finding all of these different ways of just enhancing the way that they develop, that like you can't just like be like, oh, write me this program. And so it's screening for value compatibility, typically people that really believe in open source,
Mm-hmm.
people that really believe in the web. So they already come with that background. The other thing is to not have these people get lost in the organizational shuffle. So I spend a lot of time with, people that just joined the company and are almost, ICs relative to the seniority that other people have in the company. The other antidote to almost every problem at a company is exposure hours to customer pain.
Yeah.
So literally today, before this call, I interviewed one of my exciting AI customers. And I didn't interview the CEO so that we could have a fireside chat and talk, MBA. I interviewed a quote unquote line worker, actually
Yeah.
extremely high
So smart.
reputation engineer within the company. But from the perception of like the org chart, it could look like I'm interviewing the intern. And so I interviewed that person that is actually using Vercel day in and day out to build the future of this AI product. And I told them, all right, show us all the nastiness, show us
Mhm.
all the dirty laundry, upset me, please.
And did they?
And oh my God, people were so thankful. People today, I mean, sometimes people must think I'm the worst CEO in history, the best CEO in history. Today, I earned a lot of points just because I showed the engineers working on one of our products
No, it's such
what
valuable
that
feedback.
engineer was experiencing. And
Yeah.
instead of them being upset, they literally were like, goat emoji, like greatest of all time, goat emoji, because like, yes, I showed you the reality of what's happening. I
Mhm.
took you out of your cloud nine of, illusioned, imagined perfection, and we got to the nitty gritty. And that is a centering force. Were you working on some new feature? Were you working on some new dream of yours? No, 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 no. Let's go back to like ground zero reality.
I want to ask you about the future of AI and just kind of you're so close to all these emerging trends. You mentioned vibe coding. Um, One of the paradoxes I see with all this talk of agents and vibe coding is like people are excited about it, but they're not actually using it themselves. Like, are your engineers vibe coding Vercel, or is it still being developed in a traditional way?
So vibe coding is on the opposite end of what I could consider AI assisted engineering or agentic engineering.
Hmm.
Everybody at Vercel, or nearly everybody at Vercel, uses AI. I would say probably like in the upper 90s.
Yeah.
To your point, it was natural because of our customer base. We've had the fortune to be invited as early beta testers of some of the most successful AI products on the planet. So, like the AI usage within the company has been super natural, right?
Hmm.
Super
Yeah.
emergent. One of the things that I'm really proud of, I didn't have to do an AI mandate at Vercel.
Right.
We're already there. And the other interesting end of this spectrum is vibe coding, which is everybody can cook, everybody can write software, everybody can build. So the usage of vibe coding in non-engineering functions at Vercel is also nearly 100%. Best example, literally yesterday, our VP of people said, I want this feature in one of our HR platforms, but it doesn't exist. You know what she should have, you know what the alternative was in that world? She goes and petitions to the vendor.
Right. Please, oh mighty vendor, will you add
Yeah.
this feature
So
for me? Yeah.
I met an amazing Argentinian CEO recently who's killing it. And he'd never used Vercel, but he was telling me that all his engineers wanted to move to Vercel. This is how our platform usually like spreads.
Yeah.
PLG,
Yeah.
product led growth. But sometimes I do have to face the final boss and I have to do
Yeah.
I need to meet with the CEO, CIO they want to
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
this thing is real, that, I'm going to be there for them, that they can call me, that's still real. People that are scared of agents taking their jobs, well, people still want a phone number to a human that they can call when SHIT hits the fan. So he tells me during the call, what you're saying sounds really good about Vercel, because I feel like changing something about my product is like petitioning the government. He said that he's the CEO, quote unquote, the most powerful person in the company.
And
He said
yet,
that having something changed on the product is like
His own
petitioning the
product.
government. Yeah, his own product, which is super successful, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to, as companies get bigger, as infrastructure ossifies, you get slower. You get, gatekeepers. The DevOps team can be the gatekeeper of a company. Like literally, there's one guy or gal that says no to everything
Yeah.
that the company wants to do. And
People who've
so
never
this
been
is,
around companies can't understand this. It's like if the CEO's not in charge, who's in charge?
yeah, 100%. This is why companies eventually, this is what Jeff Bezos called day two. If you cannot ship product, you're in day two. Welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And his insight that's so brilliant is that very successful companies can prolong day two for a very long time. So it looks like they're still successful. They have brand power, they have market power. But because they're not shipping, they're actually in their deathbed.
Right. They're already dead. They're just
Don't see
stumbling
it.
on without you realizing it. Yeah.
And so Vercel is like a day one invigoration machine, and it really resonates. So let's go back to my VP of people. She was in an alternative universe, she was going to petition to the government.
Right.
But it worse, like almost like the real government. Like she was going to go to the vendor that has a lot of customers, and they were going to say, hey, vendor, I really need this thing. And a very good vendor will ship really fast. And that exists
Yeah.
still, right? And,
Sure.
I hold a really high bar of our vendors. Like if our vendors do not ship fast, they do not become vendors of Vercel.
Mm-hmm.
But what she was able to do, and I think this is a little bit of the canary in the coal mine, because this lady is highly intelligent, but not software engineering technical. She was able to use V0 to build the software herself. She built the internal tool, the data visualization, the org chart tool
Mm-hmm.
that she would otherwise. And by the way, this has two positive externalities. One is she solved her problem, moves on to the next thing,
Right.
keeps the company really efficient. Dog foods are products, thank you. But the other one is that maybe she still wants the vendor to get better. Maybe there's something about that feature or capability that the vendor can learn from. So V0 becomes a communication tool.
Right.
So
can
now
show the
she can
vendor what
show
she
the vendor
wanted.
exactly what she wanted. And this is why companies like Midjourney and Black Forest Labs, who create Flux, and companies like Runway for video, there's such a big threat to the Adobes of the world. Because when you build graphics software like Photoshop, the barrier to entry to even telling your idea is insane. Like imagine I give you an empty canvas in Photoshop or Figma or whatever, and I say, all right, Eric, your vision, I need to see it so I can build it.
Yeah.
You can't. It's a non-starter. So where do you go? Well, you go to Flux or you
Right.
go to Midjourney.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the disruption. It's not that they build pixel by pixel what Photoshop had. Is that they get massively disintermediated.
Yeah. Well, because
People
so much
just
of
go
what pixels are
elsewhere.
used for is just to communicate an idea. And if you could communicate it in a different, more efficient
That's
way,
right.
you don't need the pixel perfect graphic
And in
anymore.
a way that is so much more imaginative. So
Yeah.
V0 completes your idea as well. Because I think what this person probably had in mind was a rough requirement. It was a business pain point. And so she can massively reduce the friction from downloading her brain into, I mean, I don't want to overstate the potential of this technology, but like today, it almost feels like Neuralink. The
Mm-hmm.
promise of brain computer interfaces is that they massively increase the
Yeah.
throughput of information that goes from your brain into the computer.
Yeah.
This is what AI is doing today because
Yeah, because
it
language is already Neuralink, so you don't
yeah,
necessarily need a wire. Language is already a very high
yes.
bandwidth communication tool.
There is a tool called prompt enhancer within V0. Meaning like some people might not just be able to even get enough words out of their mouth
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to really complete their idea. And so the fact that you always get this like coach for thinking, it's just kind of insane. It's very, very empowering. And that, by the way, so maybe to even wrap up that other point that you were asking about, that's what vibe coding is. Vibe coding is not, just like I YOLO into my code base and I replace my engineers and now we vibe code.
Right.
In fact, that's dangerous.
No, I know too many
So,
companies that are jumping on that bandwagon, and they'll be jumping off shortly. Don't worry.
and so we're also working on making that really safe. So we're creating agents on the Vercel AI cloud side so that people, real engineers, can make proposed changes, and AI can review and give you that safety layer, that conviction that you can actually review the code and it's good code. Because
Yeah,
basically what's happening literally as of this week in the industry is that we quote unquote have solved coding. The amount of code production that's coming out of these models
it's unbelievable.
it's just hard to even picture. And so the new bottleneck has become reviewing the code so that we make sure that it's high quality code.
Yeah,
So because
it's like a water filtration problem because we're drowning in sludge.
I love that metaphor. I love that metaphor. So you can make the case that AI continues to get better and better and better. And for example, the V0 model is downloading the brains of the Vercel knowledge base. The people that have built Google and Facebook, et cetera, that work here, they're downloading their best practices. They're coaching you through these models. And so they continue to get better, but without the water filtration system at the point of convergence, at the point of merging that proposal that the agent just made into your code base, you do need that safety net, and you
Yeah,
need that water filtration system.
we're coming to the end here, and I wanted to ask you one kind of unrelated question, if you will. Just if you don't feel like talking about this, I understand. But I was just really thinking about coming from Argentina and the political turmoil that you must have witnessed, especially as a child, and what was happening there. I think I read that you recently became a U.S. citizen. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah. First of all, congratulations
thank you.
and welcome. And to me, it's like such a critical part of my own sense of identity as an American that we be a country that would welcome someone like you. It just makes me really happy when someone chooses to bring their energy and to join this project and to become part of it. I thought that's really cool. That was a few years ago. I wonder just, yeah, how do you feel about being in this country at a time when we're going through our own turmoil that I guess, has its resonance with things that happened in Argentina? Like what's that been like for you?
Yeah, immigrating into the US was extremely hard. When I hear that someone cheated their way into the US, it is heartbreaking for me, because either we needed to have made it easier for me or we need to make it equally hard for everybody, right? And so there's somewhere in between. I love the idea that we have such a successful country and economy that we build such good infrastructure. It's like Vercel. We build such good infrastructure, we can support more and more and more and more people, applications, et cetera, into it, in more
Mhm.
innovation, more. And so I have that conflict of I want the two things. And I do think we have to continue to improve the system so that those things are true.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of pride over the hurdles that I jumped.
Mm.
The criteria that I had to meet, because I've always loved competition, number one. One of the things that I'm extremely grateful for in Argentina is that I went to a high school that had an entry exam. I entered position number 10. I hate the other 9 that beat me, but made friends with a lot of them. By the way, razor thin margins, but they beat me so bad. Anyways, I love competition. I love entry exams. I love merit. I love to grind and then overcome. And so that was true for my entry exam. It was true for qualifying for the criteria that gave me my O1 visa.
Yeah.
And it feels good. It feels good if the gold pot is at the end of the rainbow, right?
Mhm.
And this is what I think is so amazing about America, because imagine a system that had hurdles and promise and didn't deliver on giving you the freedom, tools, access, capital, connections to build. And that's the beauty of America. I truly believe that anybody can do anything. In fact, going back to the point of pride over citizenship, I really believe that you could erase everything that I've done. You could bring my bank account to zero. You could delete every line of code I have in my computer as a backup of my projects and whatever. I could start over, And on a long enough timeline, I could accomplish the same things or even greater because of that infrastructure. And so I want that to be the North Star for everybody, that they can come in here, they can innovate. I also have so many metaphors that I've learned because Vercel has over 100,000 paying teams on its platform. It's a really high number. Like if you compare other cloud infrastructure companies in the public markets, it's an astonishingly large number of paying customers for a cloud platform company. But still, that is a tiny number compared to the millions of people that use the platform, especially in our free tier. I'm going to drive a weird comparison here. Our free tier constantly gets abused. If you knew the amount of time that I personally put into maintaining that freedom of access.
Oh, I've done freemium before. I know.
And this is freemium in a way in which you get access. So this is actually a thing that's worth underlining. You know how like in Silicon Valley, you can walk into the same grocery store as a billionaire. You're surrounded by, I think we have the highest concentration of high net worth individuals on the planet.
Yeah, possibly.
The same happens at Vercel because the free tier customers are getting access to the same quality of infrastructure as the juggernauts of the internet. We give you the same computing power. We give you the same high quality data transfer network, the same high priority fiber that you're sharing fiber space with the largest companies in the world. And so I need to balance freedom of access to not having this beautiful resource that I put every ounce of energy of my soul and hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital and all of my colleagues at Vercel. How do we maintain fairness? How do we fend off bad actors? People that are trying to put things on the internet that are damaging, that are trying to misuse the resources for crypto mining a meme coin instead of building a software project.
The curse of our time. Yeah, I know.
So there's a parallel to this to countries. There's so many well-intentioned people for which I want free access, zero friction. You can just print a card or whatever. Like if you're worthy of your merit and whatever, get it. But people will abuse every system. Every system will be abused, extorted. They'll find the edge cases. There are bad people on the planet. And so how do you perfect that? You need a lot of great judgment. You need to work hard on these problems because you need to work hard on making your system available. Yeah. And is that parallel that I drew with, how easy is it to get a developer license? Like it should be available for everybody. I'm very proud that, we're a law-abiding company that follows the regulatory landscape of all of the countries where we operate in. And recently, OFAC guidance and SEC guidance changed in the US in that we could allow business affairs to happen with the country of Syria. So almost overnight, we moved really fast to restore access to Syria so that Syrian developers could use our platform. And I'm highly optimistic that if we empower developers in all of these countries, they could be an effort and a force of peace in all of these parts of the world. And so that's my point of view. It's like, we have to follow the law and we have to be open-minded and we have to be open to letting people in and figure out these hard problems.
Well, I think peace is an excellent place to wrap up. And I think, I appreciate you sharing just that little glimpse of your larger vision of what this could mean, not just for open source, not just for technology companies doing deployment, but really about the connections that are possible between people when you open up the access to the same opportunities that you and I had as kids when we first encountered open source. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Eric. This is amazing.
That very humanistic vision and bringing it into the world. And thanks for taking the time to have this conversation.
That was super fun.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.